Hello, Eric Walzakowski here, CEO of Bespoke Partners and host of Tailored Talent. Today, I'm joined by my good friend, board member, mentor, business confidant, Matt Sharrers. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks, E. Good to be here, man. My pleasure.
Well, congratulations on the publishing of your book, The Second CEO. I've been very excited to dig in and talk to you about that. So talk to me what it means to be a second CEO.
Yeah, well, I guess the good news is knowing your background and the fact that you've followed multiple founders, I can use you as an example, which ironically, I talk about you and Christy, the founder of Bespoke, in the book. But I guess for those not as close to the topic, Eric, the impetus and the passion behind this was there's probably been a couple thousand books written on how to be a CEO and probably the same number on how to start a company. But there had never been a piece of work published that took this, what I believe to be an art, of following a founder and being the second CEO of a business. And I wrote it really with three things in mind. The first was when I took over for Greg Alexander, who was my business partner and the first CEO of SBI, and he led the firm for about 10 years, there wasn't an operating manual that said, here's what you do when the founder or co-founder, in Greg's case, leaves. And how do you think about culture? How do you think about the way they put their personal stamp, especially on a professional services firm, which is what SBI, a go-to-market advisory firm that we built and ran. How do you do that? So that was one. Number two was, if you think about the dynamics that happened when I was the CEO of SBI, we had two different investors. And so we'd gone from being a private, LLC with 6 partners, being a private equity-backed company that had a board and covenant. Everything changed. Spent 20 years in boardrooms with private equity investors as they would underwrite and think about a business that they wanted to buy that was founder-led. And I witnessed so many conversations where I didn't feel like the sensitivity of the transition that they said, hey, we're going to buy this business. We probably need to change out the founder. He or she is not going to be the scaler. And how are we going to do that? What's the operating manual? I felt like there was a gap in the market. So between my personal experience, what I saw from a consulting standpoint, building and leading SBI, I felt like there was an opportunity. And, I spend my time now working with folks like you who have done it multiple times, and sometimes of a board capacity or a coaching capacity, because I think founders are the most amazing entrepreneurs because nothing gets done without them. And when you are tasked, like you and I have been, with carrying on that vision, that is almost like them handing you one of their children, it's a very, very significant responsibility. So that's where it came from.
No, absolutely. And I think it makes a ton of sense. And I mean, this, I've done 6 founder transitions. And one of the things that I like to say is no one cares more about the baby or the business than that founder in every minute detail. And so the person that comes along afterwards to help them scale the business, get over hurdles and the like, the need for EQ and really understanding what's trying to be accomplished there is important. So when I think about Bespoke, I think we do on average about 30 to 40% of our searches in a given year involve a founder at some level. We're either hiring someone to replace the founder, someone on the founder's team to help them scale the business. When you think about your experience, when is the right time to consider that founder transition?
Yeah, there's a few what I would call triggers, Eric, that we laid out in the book that in talking to founders and investors seem to be the most common. Number one, the founder wakes up one day and says, I'm exhausted. Like literally, because I have been the person to lay out the vision, drive the strategy, recruit the people, get it to a certain point, they're fatigued. And that fatigue usually has 2 components. One is maybe the business isn't doing as well as it could be. They're dissatisfied with the rate of growth or employee retention. They're noticing that they've got it to a point, but maybe the next chapter in the business's journey requires a different leader. So that's one. 2 is, I think the recognition, the self-awareness that founders have where they say, I'm a founder. I didn't start the company because I wanted to be the CEO. I ended up being the CEO by default because that's what you had to call me because I started it. I'm not necessarily the professional manager who is going to run a disciplined strategy, have a set of KPIs, think more objectively and functionally about the business versus let me craft a business that suits my personality. Let me have the people reporting to me that I kind of like to work on those things, but I don't like these things. So I think that's the second one. And then the third one is sometimes founders wake up and they want to go and start something else because they recognize that they're a founder and they're ready to take some liquidity, right? They probably went all in, as 97% of founders when they start. You know, it's the kitchen table story, the second mortgage, and they've now earned the opportunity to maybe take a breath, sit back, but also be their natural self, which says lots of employees, different strategy. That's not my power alley.
No, absolutely. And it's funny you say that about starting something else, because I think I like to say once an entrepreneur, always an entrepreneur. And I think you and I both have started business as well. And our minds just work in a way where it's like we see something, an opportunity, and look to do that. Having done 6 founder transitions, I look back and I've shared with you many times, I don't know that I would have done the first one over again, knowing what I know now, because I don't know if that founder really wanted to do the transition that they said they wanted to do. We actually ended up successfully selling the business, but it was much more painful than I expected. And I've got this set of questions now that I take founders through. But talk to me a little bit about mindset of the founder that has to be present to take care of this, and then kind of your best practices as you go about your founder transition.
Yeah, you know, Eric, it's really interesting because there are a couple of situations, if you think about like the use cases, you and I have talked about this, but for the listeners and the viewers, you have a founder transition similar to, like, say, at Bespoke, where Christy wakes up very self-aware and comes to me, and at the time, Eric Palmer and Andy Kane as the board, and says, hey, I think we need somebody else to take this business to the next step. I will tell you, that is not the majority. That is the minority. And we as a board recruited somebody like you, and we were purposeful in between that thinking to make sure that we found somebody we felt could come in and do that. Versus, Eric, where you have a situation where there's a transaction, the founder says, I'm going to be the CEO for the next 5 years with the private equity sponsor. Private equity sponsor wakes up 6 to 9 months in and goes, this isn't what we bought. And now you've got tension. That transition is very different because you've kind of got to see this investor who typically has a majority stake trying to nudge the founder out, be graceful, have empathy, to maintain, you know, their ego, if you will, intact. And that's a very different transition. So I think for founders, it's the recognition of just because you're not in charge doesn't mean your original vision and the impact you want to have on the world because you started a business can't come to life. In fact, it might be able to come to life better if you focus not on who's in charge, right? But what's the mission? So those are a couple of components I would say are really big ones, because when the founder is still running the business and then tries to make a change, probably without an investor, it's a hard thing to step away and let the second CEO be the CEO. And that can be a really tough environment that confuses employees. Who's in charge?
No, makes a ton of sense. And you know, when I think about, you know, the 30-40% involved founders, I would say, you know, half of those are founder replacements or CEO successors to the founder. One of the things that, you know, I hit on earlier that we really look for is EQ around who's coming on next, and really folks that really get in and try to understand not only what the founder's vision was for the organization, but the culture and other elements that got the organization to where it was at. And our tool du jour is we tend to use the Hogan to do a deep dive assessment. But I know you've got a lot of experience there. Talk to me a little bit about some of the mistakes that sponsors and founders might make in either selecting a CEO or the actual transition themselves.
Yeah, so I'll start with the first one first. On the selection component, I don't think people do a thorough enough job of recognizing the future back value creation strategy. So very often they think present forward and they say, okay, the business is at this size. We want to get it from, you know, 100 million in ARR to 400 million in ARR, and they do all the math. But they don't sit back and say, hey, if we're going to make that step change, which requires us to go from being domestic to international, which requires us to launching a new product, which requires us to sell through the channel instead of direct, which requires us to have multiple business units as we become a multi-product company. When you think about that future back and you write out a $400 million ARR business and what that org chart looks like, then with that sensitivity and awareness, you can look at a potential CEO candidate and say, can this person and the team we put around them actually be that team sitting around the table at the end of this next chapter, right? As we deliver on the North Star. So I think that's one on selection. And then I think on the transition, let's assume selection goes well. I think the awareness that the second CEO coming in has to build their team, right? And in the book, I talk about going from the team to your team. And Eric, you experienced this at Bespoke. I experienced this at SBI. It's going to be a different leadership team. Potentially 75 to 100% of the direct reports of the second CEO in the first 18 months will change. Not because the people that were there were the wrong people, quite the opposite. Once again, it's what's required to take the business to the next, step. And I think where investors and founders make that mistake, they want to hang on to, well, that's not our culture. That's not what made us. Well, hold on a second. We're going on another run, and that's going to be different than the one we just went on. And if we just incrementalize the change, we're probably going to incrementalize the impact and the results.
No, absolutely. And I like to often say, what got you here won't necessarily get you there. And I think one of the arts in that transition is, and I think about this with Bespoke or other transitions that I've done, is you can see what needs to happen, but it's the time you take to let it happen and bringing the organization along the journey with you is a key art to that, because most organizations, you can't just flip them 180 degrees when they hit a certain size that we talk about. And our experience with founder transitions at Bespoke, we primarily serve software companies, is on average that transition happens at somewhere between 40 and 50 million in ARR is when that starts to happen. And an organization of that size, you can't just turn on its head. You actually have to have a thoughtful process of going about that. But curious about your perspective on that transition and ascertaining what aspects of the mission and the culture are important and keepers, what aren't, so that the employees that followed the founder that potentially you want to keep stay on the journey. And then you can actually onboard new employees with the mission and the culture and the vision that is necessary to get you there.
Yeah. We talk in the book. I spent the first section after we get through what type of founder transition is it? And I share a couple of use cases and stories. And one is the Bespoke story between you and Christy, because it was really done very, very artfully. And I don't say that because I'm on your show. Is the establishment of culture, specifically around purpose, vision, and values, very often, and this isn't a mad opinion, this is what the research and the data shows, the purpose and the strategy and the values change. They go through an iteration for this next run, for the second CEO. It's not throwing out the old, it's taking the best of what got us there, and then taking a new view relative to, hey, what do we want our culture to look like and stand for, right? And how do we behave as we go from being founder-led? Because very often, Eric, as you know, a founder-led business operates with an ethos that the founder is all-knowing. When the founder jumps on a call, everybody pauses. When the founder sends an email, everybody stops. So there's a natural narcissism. It's not an attack on a founder, but there's a natural thing where you are the person that everybody waits for. So you oftentimes don't get decentralized decision-making. You oftentimes don't see as much autonomy and independence and methodical thinking. You see a lot of people seeking approval. You see a lot of people trying to be in good favor with the founder. Hey, if I'm in good favor with so-and-so, I'm good. If I'm on a text level with so-and-so, I'm good. If so-and-so knows my wife or my husband, I'm good. So you get a lot of that stuff, which needs to be sanitized and detoxed, where the business is ran not in a sterile environment, but very outcome driven, because you have shareholders and employees that are expecting a return for their time, but also a return on their money. And that's a big change culturally.
No, absolutely. And this decentralization of decision-making is critical to scale a business. And one of the things that I often find is, as the architect or second CEO, you need to spend a lot of time in communication with key people that you actually want to take with you on the next level of the journey. And it's a lot of one-on-one feedback around, look, we need you to make these decisions now, and we need you to think through this, not wait for someone else to do that. But then on the flip side, new executives you bring in,
Yes.
that are getting stuck in the mud because of the obstacles that are brought in by the founder or other members of the leadership team that are historical, you need to spend time with them as well, encouraging that your decisions are the right ones. Let's think through how to get these implemented in a way that people go on the journey with you and understand and respect your vision and your leadership for where you're trying to take your function. So it's such a great,
absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, fantastic, Matt. I mean, when I think about the importance of founder transitions to private equity, particularly growth equity firms, I mean, what a hot topic. What a great thought to get this in the market and expertise at an important time.
Yeah, thanks, man. It was a lot of fun. You know, I got immense gratitude for the investors who spent time with me, the founders that I interviewed, and a bunch of second CEOs. And it's funny, Eric, I didn't know when I had the idea, you know, and I kicked this around with Greg Alexander, right? He and I are still, you know, really close friends, and he's a great thinking partner. And I said, I wonder if there's like a lot of second CEOs, like there's no membership community for them. What I ended up finding is very organically, when I talk to people, they'd be like, oh, you need to call so-and-so. You need to call so-and-so. So I ended up with this collection of second CEOs now in my orbit. And it's been a ton of fun because that is a very interesting role. But what's cool is there is a real art, right? For people like you, right? People like Carl at Insight to Profit, right? Alex Shootman, who have this real gift of knowing what it takes to start a business, recognizing that what they're taking over, but also knowing how to scale. And it's a real skill. So it was a joy to write it, and it was a ton of fun.
No, absolutely. Well, best of luck with the launch of the book.
Thanks, man.
Given the amount of founder work we do, we'd love to have you back at a future date to talk more about it.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks, Eric.